Hello, book lovers, and welcome to the 120th episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, and I am so happy to be here with you today for our first trip to the great state of Wyoming. Today, we are visiting independent bookseller Miranda Birdall, owner of Wind City Books in Casper, Wyoming. And we are joined by an author who needs no introduction, C.J. Box. C.J. Box is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 30 novels, including the Joe Pickett series, the Cassie Duell series, and several standalone novels. He has won many awards, including the Edgar Allan Poe. He has sold over 10 million copies of his books. His books have been translated into 27 languages. They've been turned into 2 TV series, Big Sky and Joe Pickett. CJ, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a great idea and a great concept.
We love doing it, and we're going to start with you because we are here with Wind City Books because you chose them as your beloved indie, and I would love it if you told us why. Tell us what is so special about Wind City Books.
Sure. I live now on a little ranch in southern Wyoming, but I grew up in Casper, Wyoming. That's my hometown, and graduated from high school there. And I've always been really kind of excited that really the best independent bookstore in Wyoming is in Casper, and that's Wind City. There aren't that many. We kind of have a dearth of bookstores in this state. Very low populated, 600,000 people in the entire state. So there's very few bookstores and very few independents. But of those, Wind City's my favorite, and they keep on top of things. I love the way they do events. Our last event was in a brewery, which was still one of my favorite events ever, and attracted a lot of people. And because it's hometown, and because there's so many readers in the area that show up from all over the state, centrally located in Casper. So we get readers from all corners of the states and sometimes other states to come, and they do a good job. There's I used to be involved in tourism marketing, and there was a time when travel agents were all going out of business because people could book direct and buy online and buy their trips. But the really successful travel agencies were those who catered to their to their customers, knew what they wanted, get things in advance. Wind City's like that. People will ask, I'm stealing Miranda's stuff. I've been had people come in and say, what should I be reading? And they can tell them because they know their customers and they know the books.
That's fabulous. I love that. Miranda, I would love to hear from you about the experience of being an independent bookseller in Casper, Wyoming. I mean, as I've said, this is the 120th episode of our show. We've crisscrossed North America. We've spoken to people in the UK and Canada and Alaska, all over the place. Tell us, what is it like to be an independent bookstore in Wyoming?
It's incredible. Our readership and our customers here are some of the most loyal people. And just like CJ said, that's one of my favorite things is people can come in here. We build relationships with them and we can find them exactly what they want, and they continue to see us. And it's just the freedom to do everything I can here. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds great. CJ, I've read in some of the other interviews you've done, or some of the essays you've written about your experience of growing up in Wyoming, being kind of a typical kid, but also kind of a sort of a undercover reader, that sort of, your love of books was sort of a little bit on the down low for a long time, but sort of feeling like there were not a lot of books out there that really captured where you were, that captured the Wyoming experience, that captured the voice or the voices that you heard around you, and that you hoped that to grow up and maybe to try to you capture that in your books. I wonder if you would just say a little bit more about that.
Sure, you've done your homework. Thank you. Yeah, I was a kid who used to ride my bike to the library, and librarians would recommend books for me to read. It was a different thing I was getting from school or teachers, so I sort of feel like I was self-taught in a lot of ways. But I would always seek out books that were about Wyoming and the Mountain West, because I'm always fascinated with how we are viewed and portrayed. And a lot of the books, really, honestly, most of the books that were local were like local histories. At the time I grew up, I don't know if there were any well-known novelists in Wyoming. Now there's a bunch of them, but at the time there weren't. And the books I could find about Wyoming or the Mountain West tended to be written by people who had either just moved here or vacationed here, or lived in Jackson Hole or some other resort area that didn't typify the state very well. So I always thought if I wrote a book, I wanted it to be authentic to the experience and the kind of culture and the people I knew growing up, because it's a unique place. It's not the rural South. People don't speak in Southern accents. Not everybody is a Rube Western character, and a lot of the really hot button issues that everybody talks about today, nationally and internationally, tend to get started here when it comes to things like energy development, environmentalism, resource development. All these big ethical things start in this state that has very few people, but a lot of strong opinions.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wanted to capture that, and I think I have. The people I meet in Wyoming who are readers of the books all seem to claim that they know everybody in every book, even though I know they don't, because I made them up. But I think it does ring true. I want to keep it that way. I want to be authentic in that way.
Yeah. Miranda, what's your take on the state of Wyoming literature at this point? I don't know if you have a Wyoming author shelf or section in the store, but what do you see in terms of the local literary scene?
Yeah, it continues to grow every day. I have people that approach me constantly. So there are a lot, and I do my best to support as many people that I can and give them a platform to get their books out there. And I hope that grows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Thank you to the audience for all of the love that's popping up in the chat. We've got a bunch of Joe Pickett fans here. Want to remind everybody who's watching live now, as well as watching this on video in future time, we exist to support independent book selling. Today we are supporting Wind City Books. We are dropping links into the chat so that you can head to Wind City online, pick up a copy of one of CJ's newest books. He kindly put out 2 just this year for all of you fans. Shadows Reel, the latest Joe Pickett, Treasure State, the latest Cassie Duel, both out in 2022. You can head to the website, pick up a copy, pick up any of the prior books if you don't have them. It's the holiday season. Support independent book selling. We appreciate it. Lots of Joe Pickett fans in the chat, CJ, and I mean, Joe Pickett has really become sort of an iconic character. I know that you've said elsewhere that you are somebody, you're a real outliner, that you do detailed outlines for your work, very lengthy novel outlines. But that when you wrote the first Joe Pickett, when you wrote Open Season, you didn't know it was going to be a series until the publisher said, "Hey, give us 3 of these."
Mm-hmm.
Now that it's sort of you realize that this is a long-term relationship with Joe Pickett, that you guys are in it together for the long haul. Do you now have an outline for the whole series? I mean, have you structured the series the way that you would a book? And in fact, do you know how it will end? Do you know what Joe Pickett's ultimate fate will be?
Good question. The answers to those questions are no and no.
Okay.
I don't ever start thinking about the next Joe Pickett book until I finish the one I'm working on. And I do that. I shouldn't say that. There's sometimes there's a little bit of a thread or a hint I can pick up on the next book, kind of, a question. But generally, I try to write each book as a standalone. Mm-hmm. And I tend not to think about the next one until, like I said, it's put to bed. And the reason is maybe it's just because I'm shallow, but the other reason is because I think readers will pick up if you're holding back. And I mean, I think I do as a reader. I can, I've read books before in a series and thought, come on, don't me out till the next one. That's not fair.
Right.
So I try to make it just as complete as I can. And no, I don't have a big overall ending arc. Joe Pickett, one thing that's unique about the series, I think, is that it happens in real time. Joe Pickett is, in the very first book, open season, is 32. And in the current book I'm writing today, he's 51. So, there's a natural endpoint to this, but not every book is every year. Some join right at a week after the last one ended, and so on. I have a feeling that when Joe Pickett is ready to retire, I will be ready to retire, but I don't have any plans how that's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a unique thing to have this relationship with a character over the course of like 20 years. And, I read recently in an interview, William Kent Kruger talking about his Cork O'Connor books and sort of saying that he feels like Cork is like a friend of his, that he sort of like has this relationship with this guy. Sort of, I mean, how do you feel about Joe Pickett? I mean, what is it like to kind of have somebody have real estate in your head for 2 decades like this?
Oh, I mean, I think I know that he has grown and matured since the very first books, where he was very naive and it still makes a lot of mistakes, but has a little harder bark than he used to have on him. I don't know, Joe Pickett is not me, but I understand the character throughout. And there's not a lot of, there's some nuances to him and some new things here and there. But I kind of hold him at arm's length a little bit and try to make sure that he is not my alter ego, but he's his own character. And I think different characters in the books all have a different aspect of my personality or thought process, but there's never one that represents me completely. But I always like writing about Joe Pickett. Very comfortable slipping into those shoes or those boots with each book. But to me, they're still mainly about the issues and the controversies and the plots. And Joe Pickett is just there to kind of carry them through.
Interesting. Miranda, would you tell us a little bit about the Joe Pickett readership? I mean, when a new Joe Pickett book comes out, do we just have people just lining up at the store to get it? Do you find yourself hand selling Joe Pickett to people? I mean, what do you observe?
I don't think there's a single day that goes by that we don't have something of CJ's that walks out the door. We don't have to hand sell. People come flying in. People know way before that he has a new book coming out. So we have pre-orders many months in advance. The second the word is out, we have pre-orders. He has a huge fan base here, and it's wonderful. It's beautiful to see when they come out for the events and they get to see him in person and actually interact with him. So yeah, it's something to see for sure.
It's so cool.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and CJ did an interview a few years ago that I saw, I think it was with Wyoming PBS, where he sort of was commenting a little bit on his readership and observed sort of that the gender split was a little bit different for his books than it is for men. Commented that, for most novels, it tends to be 80-20 female or, something like that in terms of readership, but that the research on his books is that it's sort of a 50-50 split. I mean, do you find that Joe Pickett is bringing men into the bookstore who would not otherwise come? I mean, what do you think about that?
It's everyone. I see it across all ages, even younger teenagers that start Joe Pickett. They love it as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would love to talk to the two of you a little bit about genre. I mean, CJ, I believe you said elsewhere that you didn't necessarily think of yourself as, I guess, a mystery writer right out of the gate. I think that my sense, and Miranda, you can tell me if you disagree, is that these books sort of cross genres. There are sort of mysteries. There are some that are kind of more thriller. The Highway, I think, was sort of one that was, I guess sort of, a dark thriller. So I mean, I guess, CJ, I'll go to you on it first. Do you think about genre when you sit down to write and kind of making sure that you're punching the tropes of the genre that you're trying to write to? Or do you just kind of do your thing and then the publisher figures out where to shelf it?
It's more the latter. I think it's always good. I learned early on, it's always good to be classified in a store, in a bookstore, under mystery, because that's where people tend to go first. And I never think about the structure of a mystery or a thriller or a police procedural or any of that. I never sit down and say, here are the points I need to make, because some books are classified more of mine as, like you say, as thrillers. But I've just never thought that much about it ahead of time. I like to be there, but to me, I always think I'm writing contemporary Western novels as opposed to mysteries, thrillers. They're more about the sense of place and the culture and the themes and the controversies than about a whodunit or solve the mystery kind of book.
That's really interesting, because I think I have seen in sort of writing about your work, this phrase of a Western novel or sort of Western literature. Earlier this year, we had the writer Eli Craner, who wrote Don't Know Tough, on the show. And his work is characterized as Southern Gothic. And I said, Eli, what does it mean to be Southern Gothic? And he sort of said, like, hell if I know. And I sort of wanted to ask you, sort of, what does it mean to be a Western novel? And I guess, it's sort of, obviously it's set in sort of in the Mountain West, and you take up issues of environmentalism and land rights and sort of sort of the collision between federal regulation and sort of landowners and sort of these sort of issues of the West. But I mean, are there other things about voice and tone that make it a Western novel?
I think kind of, I don't have this very well defined, but a Western novel or movie or whatever, I'll have certain kind of elements to it. One is it's usually a rugged individualist in the middle of a vast area dealing with things that are coming from the outside, and as opposed to the inside. And it's not a civilizational novel. And, the bad guys are really bad sometimes, even though they may have their points of view. So I think there's certain kinds of framing for a contemporary Western or a traditional Western that I think I go by, without really thinking about it a lot. But certainly, the individualism, the kind of life on the frontier kind of thing where, weather and landscape plays a huge role in everyday life, those kind of things.
Yeah. Miranda, what do you think? What do you think is sort of the genre of sort of Western lit, or, what does that mean to you?
I would agree with everything he said. It's harder for me to put into words, but definitely it's something that encapsulates Wyoming and the uniqueness of this place.
Yeah, there's just such a strong sense of place to these books. I will say, like, I'm coming to you from the Northeast. I have never been to Wyoming. I've never been to Montana. Like, it's not a part of the country I've been to. And yet, like, I open up one of these books and I immediately have a sense of place and I'm sort of exactly where I am. And it's just so just well rooted in that environment. Couple of audience questions coming in, guys. So yeah, thank you to the audience for your comments, and absolutely drop questions into the chat. We will get to you. So go ahead and drop questions. I knew this one was coming. CJ, a lot of the people who watch are themselves writers or aspiring writers. And so it is impossible to look at your resume and not ask this question, which is just how does it happen? You have 2 books out this year. We should say also a new Joe Pickett coming out February 28th, Stormwatch. Yeah, and I have this question for you too. And you've said in other interviews that you've gotten to a point where you can write full time. You no longer have a day job and so forth. So that, but I mean, there are many writers who write full time and do not produce even a fraction of the volume that you do. So, what's the deal? What can you tell us?
I think part of it is, my background is journalism, which means, especially if you work for small newspapers, which is I did, you really learn to write on demand at any time. You can't wait for inspiration to write that article that you've been hired to write. So I think part of it comes from that training, but also it's just a matter of I just go to work every day like everybody else, and my work is writing. And some days I don't work that long. I don't work an 8-hour day like most people in the country and the world. But I do try to be very organized so that when I do sit down to write, you talked earlier about the outline. I work a lot. I do a lot of preparation before I actually start. So I know every day where the book's going to go or where it should go. I may change it at some point, but when you know where it's headed, then you don't sit there and stare at a blank screen and wonder, what am I going to work on today? Right. You know what points you're going to hit. I've got bullet points throughout the entire thing. So even on days when I don't feel like writing, I'm still able to do my mandatory 1,000 words, even though they may not be.
I've heard you say that 1,000 words a day.
They may not be very good, but I know the next day I can go in and backfill that or edit it, and I do. So I just push ahead. I know, and I don't mean to minimize the person who asked the question, but a novel is maybe 80,000 words, sometimes 100,000. If you write 1,000 words a day, you should be able to write a book every 4 months if you work every day. I don't do that, but I keep on a schedule and keep ahead of the schedule. Recently, I found out that worldwide pandemics spur the creative process because you can't do anything else. That's why there were 2 books last year.
Right.
But I hope to kind of slow that down to about 1 a year.
Yeah. Give yourself a break.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, I think that the piece about sort of writing, whether you're inspired or not, is, I think you would have commented in another interview that said if you wrote when you were inspired, you'd have 2 books by now. And I think it's just such great advice, just that, you can't wait for the wave to catch you. You've got to just sort of get yourself going. I think we have an audience question for Miranda. We're going to put it up on the screen. Yeah. What is the book scene like out in Wyoming? How do you think readers there differ from what you see of readers in other parts of the country? Yeah, what do you think about that?
I think we're pretty busy, and busier than what most people would think of when they think of Wyoming. We're steady. We have all kinds of readers that read across all genres, all types of people. So, I mean, when I see the bestseller list, we match up pretty closely to what is going on everywhere else. And it's the same for us. We really have a huge readership here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let me see. Returning for a moment, and this is going to be a question I'm going to have for both of you, to this issue. Again, a lot of people watching are themselves aspiring writers, and we always like to talk to authors and to booksellers about this issue of I guess you'd sort of say commercial success, or sort of what makes for a book that becomes successful, what makes a book into a breakout hit. Even with our show, we don't usually have people quite as who sell quite where you do, CJ. So I guess I'll start with you. I mean, you wrote Open Season. I think Open Season was your first book.
It was first novel. And I mean, here we are, right? I mean, tens of millions of books later, I think it's sort of given rise to a little cottage industry. They're not the only game warden books out there anymore. I know Paul Doiron writes the My Beloved State of Maine, writes the game warden books, which are wonderful. You've got 2 TV shows. I mean, all of this stuff.
I mean, did you see it coming? Did you try to sort of catch a wave in the market, or was it just lightning that struck?
I so often call it my 20-year overnight success story. It took 20 years after I first conceived of the idea of open season, before that book was actually published. Mainly because I was raising a family, starting a business, running that company. And I worked kind of in secret on it in the back. And it wasn't my first novel. It was my third, but it was the first one that my wife actually said, this one's good enough. You should send this one out. The first two were practice books. But I would never know. I mean, when I think back on it, I think, the world was not clamoring for a Wyoming game warden series, for God's sake. I was just trying to write about the issues in the book, and some of those issues resonated, but I think even more so that the place and the characters resonated. And as I've gone on, I never try to think of what I think that's death for an author, is to try to think about what's the coming thing, what new trend do I have to jump on for this book. I think you just have to write what's, as trite as this sounds, what's true to you and what's true to the character of the book, and hope that it finds an audience, as opposed to trying to chase that audience.
Yeah.
When I meet aspiring authors who tell me that the book they're working on is just like this big mega bestseller we all heard about, they're trying to chase the market as opposed to write something original.
Yeah. And I think it is the character. I mean, I think that, if I think about open season, it has a great hook. And, it has, all of the important characteristics of a mystery novel. It is a cool mystery. It has a great hook. But I think it's really the character. I mean, it's really Joe Pickett. We find out very early on that here's this guy who's struggling to pay his bills. He's a game warden who has a hard time shooting straight. His career is not off to a rollicking great start. He's had a real tough time getting his career off the ground. Had a very embarrassing incident, and he's just extremely human. I mean, I read that and I was like, this guy, he's like me. I mean, he's not James Bond. He's not Sherlock Holmes. He's not this kind of untouchable, superhero. And I think people relate to him, and people root for him.
Thank you. I think there's another aspect to that, which is, again, I never sat down and I wanted a flawed character to begin with. But what I found out over the years is that I think it increases the tension in the suspense in the books to know that the protagonist might just screw up and do the wrong thing. And so that you, the reader, are as nervous for him as, he should be if he knew better. Because he could do anything, make any dumb mistake or walk in the wrong door. And I think that actually keeps you turning the pages to find out if the right decisions are going to be made. Yeah,
absolutely. Miranda, can you crack the publishing code for us? It's,
do it, Miranda. I want to hear this.
Yeah.
It'll be breaking news. I mean, we know Stormwatch is going to sell, right? Stormwatch is number 23, I think, in this series. We know Stormwatch is going to sell. But as a bookseller, when you have like a debut coming out, I mean, can you spot the ones that are going to take off? Do you have a nose for it? Can you influence it? Are you hand selling the things you're passionate about and getting them off the ground? Or are you sort of a spectator like the rest of us?
At times you can spot the ones that are going to be big. Like we know CJ in our store, it's going to be a huge success without a doubt. Others we hear about and we wait and see how it works. But a lot of it is what we read and what we hand sell and what we're passionate about here. That's one of our favorite things, is bringing something different to a person that they might not have necessarily picked up. Mm-hmm. So no, there's no for sure formula as to what's going to take off and what isn't. We're surprised constantly by many books.
Well, and also the books that are supposed to take off and that don't. I mean, the ones that you have, have boxes and boxes of them in the back because they were supposed to take off and they're just not. I mean, it's such a mystery. One thing that I think really can, in my mind, can really sort of enhance sales are when an author comes out and does events. And we are finally getting back to doing in-person events. It is so good to be able to go out to bookstores and go to events and do events again. And I've been totally thrilled to be doing that over the past couple of months. Miranda, talk to us a little bit about events in the store. I would love to hear about what's going on. I would also, here's a question I always ask booksellers, and it may or may not spark something for you, but I'm always curious if there's an event that you remember, especially memorable, interesting, bizarre, funny, whatever, off the rails. I mean, like, if there's anything that comes to your mind, we'd love to hear it.
Well, definitely the one I just did in October with CJ Box at Gruner Brothers Brewing was very memorable. It was a perfect, beautiful day. Everyone that came in, they were wonderful. We had people that were just traveling through from Canada that happened to just make it for the night. And some of the conversations I had with them really stuck out in my mind. I haven't had anything too bizarre that I could talk about. I wish I did. That's actually one of my favorite questions. I was going to ask CJ if like, what's the most bizarre thing that's happened to you at a signing? But as far as events go, yeah, his stuck out. And of course, we have another wonderful Wyoming author, Craig Johnson, and he is one of the most genuine, just as CJ Box, incredible people that we work with and are so proud to call them one of our Wyoming authors. Mm-hmm. And he always sticks out for me as well. He keeps me on my toes.
We're going to drop Craig Johnson links to buy Craig Johnson books from the store in the chat to the online audience now in future time. Click through, pick up some books. It is holiday season. Put Craig Johnson in some people's stockings along with the most recent CJ Box. That's great. CJ, I'm sorry, you were going to add to that?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think one thing that's, I don't know how much interest this is of people, but, a state like Wyoming, readers are very enthusiastic readers, but they've not necessarily ever been to a book signing event. It's not like in the cities and the other places I go where people will go sometimes every week to hear an author and they kind of know the protocol and all of that. And I think in Wyoming, an awful lot of the people who show up, it's the first time they've ever been at a book signing event. A lot of, especially the men, are quite nervous that they're there and they don't know how they should be acting. It's like if you drag somebody to the opera for the first time, what should I be doing here? So I think after a few of them, they get used to it, but there's always that kind of reticence. And also people calling the store while you're doing the event saying, can he sign a book for me? I'm just too nervous to show up.
Well, I mean, you're a celebrity, man. So, I mean, people are just, people may be nervous.
I don't know why.
Well, but I think your point is a good one, that I think that, if people don't go to these events all the time, people just may not, it may just sort of seem in some way intimidating. And I mean, for those of us who sort of do go to them all the time and who give the events, it's sort of like, well, what's the big deal? We're just showing up and talking books. But if it's not what you do, it probably does feel like you're a fish out of water. CJ, another question for you. You have, as I said earlier, you have the Joe Pickett books, but also the Cassie Duel and also the several standalone books. I mean, I'm always kind of amazed by that. I think about this. I mentioned Kent Kruger before, and I think about this with William Kent Kruger as well, who has his Cork O'Connor books, but then just sort of like turns around and does like This Tender Land, like I guess just for the hell of it. I mean, it's just amazing. And I feel like if I had something like Cork O'Connor or Joe Pickett, I would just sort of, ride that horse. And, you have chosen to really branch out, to write about different characters, to write different types of books. And in fact, from what I understand, your publisher was not crazy about the idea. And you had to go and get like a second publisher to be able to do that. So, it was obviously something that you really wanted to do. Why? What's going on with that? Are you sort of flexing different muscles? What's the story?
Well, yes, I am. But the answer is sometimes there's an idea that's just I can't get rid of, and I've got to do it. And it can't be a Joe Pickett book. Joe Pickett book. I mean, Joe is a Wyoming game warden. He's in this state. But if I wanted to write a book like The Highway, like you mentioned earlier, that can't be a Joe Pickett book. It's about a highway serial killer across the United States. So in that case, I did a lot of research on that. I went on went with some long haul truckers across the country, learned about the lingo and the way of life, and wrote that book as just a it's a really creepy book, but it's not a Joe Pickett book by any means. But it just every once in a while, there's just an idea that I can't get rid of that can't be a Joe Pickett, or in some cases, a Cassie Duell novel. The book Blue Heaven that won the Edgar Award has to take place in North Idaho because it would not work if it wasn't there, because it was based on real events. So therefore, that's why that was a standalone based there with, none of the characters in it.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit within Joe Pickett's world. CJ, audience question from Thomas, who's watching on YouTube. Do you hunt elk?
Yes, I do. I don't have the passion for big game hunting that I did when I was young. I think, I used to have a lot of bloodlust and go hunting a lot. Now I mainly hunt elk because I have 3 daughters, and 2 of them are real foodies, and they love to serve their guests elk. So every year they start putting pressure on me to get, go get one so they can do that. And I live on this little ranch, and I've been looking the last few mornings for elk to show up because they have in the past. And as soon as they do, I'm going to get one.
It's a first for us in 120 episodes. Nobody's ever asked that question of an author before. Nobody asked Judy Blume if she hunts elk. Nobody asked Ann Patchett if she hunted elk. But that's great. I love that. That's fabulous. Okay, well, I mean, it is that time of the show where we need to get down to business and we need to sell some books. So for the audience, everybody, it is December 7th. It is holiday season. You need to buy some books. And I promise you that you'll be better off buying them from Win City Books than you will from any of the online retailers who shall go unnamed, or a big box or something like that. So we're going to be dropping links. We want you to buy from Win City, support independent local book selling. Miranda, you are the professional among us, so I'm going to go to you first. Give us some book recs. What are you excited about? What are you reading? What's out there right now?
Well, always CJ Box, and I am a big fan of the Highway series because I like darker books, so I'm good with it. It scares a lot of people, but it was one of my favorites. I'm currently reading a horror novel by Grady Hendrix that's coming out in January that I'm very excited for it to show up. And then very highly recommended a children's novel that I just read. It's called Shad Hadid by George Rige. And it is one of the best children's books I've read since probably the Harry Potter series. And I mean that. It's excellent. And it's my children's pick of the year.
Again, Miranda, say the title again.
Shad Hadid. It's SHAD HADID. It's wonderful, magical, funny, everything a children's book should be.
Fabulous. All right. We're going to link to those in the chat. Audience members, you know what to do. CJ, what about you? What are you reading?
I'm reading. John. I'm glad you gave me a heads up on this because the 3 last books I've read. Righteous Prey by John Sanford, who I'm a big fan of his. He actually mentions me in this book, which has shocked me. We have the same editor, so there's a connection. Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby.
Oh, yeah.
Big fan of his. Got to meet him this year. The other one is not in the genre at all. It's Napoleon by Andrew Roberts. This character who everybody knows the name, but very few people can really tell you very much about him. And I found it fascinating.
Fabulous. That's great. Thank you for those recs. Miranda, a viewer has a technical question and we need to get you to answer. Is Win City affiliated with any ebook selling?
Unfortunately, we aren't at this time. It's something I'd like to look into in the future. But we do a collaboration with an audiobook independent company, Libro.fm. So if people prefer their books in audiobook form, we can be linked up through them as well.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Total pleasure speaking with the two of you. Thank you for those book recs. This is such a great conversation, and I'm so happy that we've finally made it out to Wyoming. Our mission on this show is to visit all 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico. We've also done the UK and Canada. We're so close. I want to take a moment to say to the audience, we're down to 4 guys, and we're going to put them up. Because if you know any bookstores, if you know any booksellers, if you know any authors in Indiana, Louisiana, Maryland, or Nebraska, send them our way. We need to check off these boxes in 2023 so that we can claim that we've done all 50. Miranda, last question of the show is traditionally for the bookseller, and it goes like this. Success in independent book selling is part luck, part hard work, and part what else?
Heart.
Heart. I love that. I think that's so true. I think all of the independent booksellers we speak to have so much love for what they do. They have so much love for their communities. They have so much love for the authors, and I think that's exactly right. And that's why we love doing this show. Fabulous. Thank you for that. To the audience, go to Win City Books Online, pick up Shadows Reel, pick up the first 21 Joe Pickett books if you haven't read them yet, pick up Treasure State, pre-order Stormwatch coming February 28th, pick up any of these other books that we have mentioned, and also come back here the same time next week because we're going to Vegas. It's Vegas time. We're going to be making our first trip to Nevada. We're going to be with author Amanda Skenendor at Writer's Block in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's going to be a great conversation. Same time, same place. Please join us. To the two of you, CJ Box, best-selling author many, many, many times over. Miranda Berdahl, Win City Books. Thank you both so much for being here today. It's been a complete pleasure to speak to the two of you, and I truly appreciate your time.
Thank you. That was fun. Well done, Miranda. Way to go.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And to the audience, stay well,